I'm asking these questions that I'm asking the audience to myself. What my perceptions are, what things do I need to unpack, like how I'm treating stories of trauma. All these things are conversations I want to bring into a space because I'm asking those questions of myself.
Hey, Sky.
Hi, Jenny. How are you?
I'm good. I'm just in this sound booth by myself, surrounded by foam.
Oh, where?
In my office.
In Soho.
In Soho, yeah.
Oh, I'm in Midtown, 30 Rock at NBC.
So we're both in sound booths.
We are both in sound booths, respectively. That speaks to how big and how small New York City is, isn't it?
And just like how busy and important we are that we can't meet up in person.
Yeah, or just New York schedules, right?
We just have New York schedules.
Who has time?
No one has time.
No one has time. But I am excited to hear how your conversation went with Alexandria Bombach, the filmmaker. How did you first find out about her?
So I found out about Alexandria last year. I went to Sundance and everyone was talking about her film. It's called On Her Shoulders. And as she alluded to before, it's sort of this like kind of meta film about the way that the media and filmmakers portray stories of trauma. And it actually follows this Yazidi woman, Nadia Murad. She recently won the Nobel Peace Prize. So if you've heard of her, that's why. And she was captured by ISIS and was a sex slave for them for many years and escaped. But the movie isn't really about that. It's just about the way that she now is portrayed in the like Western media. And it was kind of like looking in a mirror. It was very disturbing because I am a journalist and not that I sensationalize stories or anything, but I think that there is always this fear among journalists of like, am I exploiting this person? It's just like by nature feels very exploitive. And same with documentary filmmaking in a way. And it really just made me so acutely aware of the way that I'm portraying stories of trauma now.
Oh, wow. I can't wait to see it. I saw her previous film that she did with Mo Scarpelli, Frame by Frame, and that was also a story about trauma and pretty meta also. It followed a bunch of photojournalists in Afghanistan fighting for freedom, so to speak, freedom of the press. So I guess that, that's her beat, and I cried. It was beautiful. So I can't wait to see this one. And it was an Oscar contender.
Yes, it was an Oscar contender. She won Best Directing at Sundance, and you can actually see the film now. It's streaming on Amazon, and you can buy it on iTunes.
Oh, well, as soon as I get out of this booth and finish up, I'm going to go home and watch that.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And here is Alexandria.
And welcome to another episode of Rough Gut.
You graduated college in 2008 at the height of the financial crisis when no one was getting jobs and decided to go into the riskiest job of all, which is filmmaking. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, I had my first camera when I was 13, saved up a bunch of money to get this crappy camera that records on tapes, but I would always film my friends, but I never even connected it with the idea that I could become a filmmaker. For some reason, I think I just, it never even came into my consciousness at all until much later into my 20s. And even after graduating and realizing there were no jobs, I started to do video production and trying to make, 4x3 little videos for YouTube that had just started for different outdoor industry companies. And so I really, even when I started in, 2008, 2009, it took a long while for me to have the confidence to even admit to myself what I actually wanted to do, which was make films. And that really started in 2011 was the first time I made my first film.
What part of your personality do you think was attracted to just videos in general?
I'm definitely an editor. I'm in love with creating these stories behind the scenes from a bunch of different footage and trying to figure out what the best story is to speak to an audience. I just saw pretty immediately after my first film that was about people living in tiny spaces to do what they love outside. It was a cult classic called 23 Feet. And I ended up, and 23 Feet was the size of my Airstream, and we ended up doing outdoor theater tours where the film screened on the side of the Airstream and went, and everywhere from screening to 30 climbers in Yosemite to blocking off a street in Portland, Oregon to 300 people. And it was this real rogue distribution outlet, but it attracted so many people because I think it was so unique. And then that experience and seeing the film, a bunch of people reached out to me afterwards and said that they had quit their jobs and got out of their leases and bought a van and were going to now live on the road. And I had so much feedback like that from people after they saw the film, and it just really clicked in me how powerful storytelling is and made me want to do more of it.
Yeah, totally. What kind of inspired you to make that jump? Because I think it's just making a film is so risky, and it's fascinating to me that anyone does it. You're putting all your time and your money into it. So how did you bridge that gap from just making these videos to like, okay, I'm gonna actually like make a 30-minute film?
I think I just really felt a calling to the craft. I really love so many aspects of filmmaking, whether it's, the cinematography and the relationships that you can build with subjects and to getting into the edit. I feel kind of funny saying this, but it was never kind of a question in my mind. I think once it clicked, and I can remember the precise moment of when it did click. I was at a film festival in Carbondale, Colorado called 5 Points, and it was my first time to a film festival, and I had just bought the Airstream to live in and had bought a veggie diesel truck that broke down. I ended up being stranded in Boulder, Colorado for about 2 months and lost all my money and had to put the Airstream in storage and hitchhike down to get back to Durango, Colorado, where I was going to school, and stopped at this film festival so I could get a ride from friends there. And I was telling somebody this story, and a film was starting, and this guy sitting next to me on the other side of me was mad that I was speaking, and as the lights were going down, he's like, "Well, why don't you just make a film about it?" And and it was this kind of weird fairy dust, mean white man giving me permission, weird moment, but it was just kind of a realization of, oh, that's actually exactly what I want to do, is make a film about, living simply for your passions. And I think, from there on out, it's just been an absolute sprint, since that time. It's just been full on. I've never wanted to stop or questioned it or thought maybe my work should take a turn towards more commercial stuff, or it's just been, I want to make films and with my vision and the exact stories that I want to tell, and just pushing towards that.
So you mentioned that 23 Feet was about people like living for their passion, basically, which is the outdoors. And it seems like your other films since then, although they're not necessarily about nature or the outdoors, they're also about people who have completely dedicated their lives to one cause. What about that kind of drew you in?
Yeah, I guess that's true. I'll just have these little realizations during this podcast. Yeah, I guess that is true. I don't know if that's been by coincidence. It must not be. But I with Frame by Frame, it was just so obvious we wanted to make a film about Afghan photojournalists, and all of the photojournalists in that film were very passionate about what they did. Yeah, I guess I'm very drawn to people who are passionate about what they're doing and unpacking that and showing the real behind the scenes of what that's like, because it's not always easy. I think, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned you're also an editor. So you're a director, you're an editor, you're also a shooter and a producer. Do you think that having experience in all of those other fields changes your approach to directing a film?
Oh, definitely. most of the films I've made really required a small and intimate crew, either one or two shooters at most, and no sound person. So it's been very appropriate for me to direct by shooting. And then, I love editing and really find the way that I'm able to tell stories is, sitting with a huge amount of footage and, distilling it over a long period of time and really bringing out what I feel is a bigger truth. But, editing makes me a better shooter and shooting makes me a better editor. And I really don't even consider myself or think about myself as being a director until I get to film festivals.
Mm.
No one calls me that. Yeah.
Does it make directing harder in any way? Because not to say that you have an ego or anything, but you're like handing over control of your work to an editor. And I can imagine being an editor, like at heart, as you say, it must be hard to do that.
Well, yeah, and I love this conversation, and it's really fun to have with other filmmakers. I think it's two things. I'm super obsessed with feedback, just to be clear. Like, feedback is a full-on contact sport for me. I I love having, full theaters of civilians or muggles, and getting feedback from people, and then also having screenings with more focused style groups of filmmakers and people I trust with story, and really being extremely critical of my process and trying to open myself up to people's notes and hear where they're coming from. Because for me, it's just incredibly important to make sure that I'm not, losing the forest through the trees. But the reason I do edit is because so much of the films that I've been making, frame by frame, for example, I'm glad that we went that direction, because I think the story that we are trying to tell, so much of that is a part of actually being in that place. Like, you needed to be there to really understand it. And the other co-director and I used to joke, if we would have handed it over to another editor, maybe they would have opened the film with a mosque and a call to prayer and a sunset, and there's just so many things that we wanted to break the mold on when it came to people's perception of this place. And it was already so much hard work that we just wanted to make sure that the editor really understood place and the people, in an intimate way. And the same thing goes with On Her Shoulders, making a film about Nadia Murad's experience. I don't know if I could have expressed what I wanted it to feel like to another person accurately. So much of that film is not necessarily me trying to get you to understand how Nadia feels, because I think that's impossible. We can never really know how she feels. But what I wanted to do is to try and get the audience to sit next to Nadia as she's going through all these meetings and testimonies and interviews, to really understand what it's like to be in that room, just as I was in that room. And so editing my own films, I feel like I can, open up my own chest and really pour that into the edit, versus trying to convey that through a filter of another person.
It makes it hard to make a lot of films, though, if you're editing your films,
Yeah, probably. I will say that I think it's appropriate for other stories.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll make a film one day where it feels completely appropriate to have another editor. But for now, for me, I feel like it's the most responsible thing I can do as a storyteller for the films that I've made.
As somebody who is directing, shooting, and editing a film, do you edit as you go, or like what is your workflow, I guess? How much time do you let go by before you look at the footage and start editing?
Well, I've had two similar and unique situations with both of my features where we were only able to shoot for about 3 months. With Frame by Frame, we could really only afford to do one big trip to Kabul, and then the money was gone. It's very expensive to shoot with. We have a wonderful fixer and a driver and a car hired every day and hotels and all these things. It just becomes really expensive every day to shoot. And then with On Her Shoulders, we the production company gave Nadia and her team a predetermined timeline of how long it would take to shoot, because that film was supposed to be a short film. And once I met Nadia, it just became very obvious that it should be a feature, because we were the only ones with access, and her story has been told so many times that I felt like it needed to be done in a different way with more nuance. And once that shoot was over, which was about 3 months, I went into the edit and just made the film in secret, which was pretty wild. But so it was the same amount of footage for both frame by frame and On Her Shoulders, but I had no option to go back. And I think I'm a little nervous for the next film, because there's no one, pushing me out of access or anything like that, or financial reason to stop. So I hope I don't make like a 10-year shoot or something like that.
So you essentially shot for a short film, but you had enough footage, you thought, for a feature-length film, and you didn't tell your production company and just like edited it into what it is now?
Yeah, I did. I definitely shot as if I was shooting a feature. I mean, I pushed like crazy for more shoots within that 3 month period of time, and just had that in my mind, because I was hoping during production that they would understand the importance of it. But when the shoot was over, they were still pretty adamant that it needed to be a short film. And so I just edited a feature instead and didn't tell them until I was done with that first rough cut. And we had to turn in a rough cut in 6 weeks. So we edited the first rough in 6 weeks, which was insane because it's in a different language.
My God.
Yeah, it was pretty nuts. It was my assistant editor, who was eventually credited as an additional editor, Michael Pacuzzo, and I in my parents' garage in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I didn't sleep much. I was just really scared that they were going to be so mad or something that they would, take the film away from me. And I, felt obviously just such immense responsibility to Nadia and the story, and felt like, it was the right thing to do, was to really breathe nuance and respect into this film. And that required a longer film. But eventually they did come on board after those 6 weeks. So we were able to make a feature, and they came on fully and funded the entire thing. So that was incredible.
Wow. I mean, they should be happy. They basically paid for a short film and got a long film.
Well, and this film was way more expensive than I thought it was going to be, because we thought in the beginning, Haley, the producer, called me and said, "We want to make a short film about Nadia Murad. Can you go to Kurdistan in 2 weeks?" And I said, "Let me think about it," and got back to her the next day and said yes. And so I packed my bag to go to Kurdistan for a month and a half. And then I get to New York to meet up with Nadia and the organization that was with her. And they said, "We're not going to Kurdistan anymore. We're going to Canada."
Very different.
Very different than Kurdistan. Yeah. I packed very wrong for Canada. And so it was pretty wild, because from then on out, it was that was the rhythm and the speed of what we were following. Every day it was like a different place that they needed to go. And we had no idea what places we were going to. So we ended up going to Canada twice, Greece twice, and Germany twice, and New York twice.
When you brought that rough cut back to the production company, how did they react?
Well, so how it happened was I was supposed to have a meeting with the producers in New York. I was here for Doc NYC doing a panel, and they ended up not being able to come to that meeting. And I had this whole thing prepared of like going to pitch them, but then they didn't come. And so I went home the next day to Santa Fe and got Bryn Muser's cell phone number from a friend of mine. And he's the CEO of Riot. And I wrote out a pitch and just called him. And he said, "Well, I don't know. No, we've really planned for this to be a short, but I just, pitched how it was our responsibility to really have to do the story justice, and all the things I was feeling about it, and told him that I hadn't edited a short. So either way, we were trying to make the deadline for Tribeca. And finally, at the end of the call, he got it and was really excited. And He's like, all right, it's you and me. Let's do this. And I got off the phone and like fell to my knees and started sobbing, but it was just so stressful. And then he told the producers, and we had to adjust our working relationship from then on out, and be making a feature film.
And then from there, you edited it yourself.
Yeah, so Michael was my assistant editor in that edit, and then he came back several times in short spurts to work with me. But we were having such a problem because I couldn't find a translator that spoke both the dialect of Kurmanji, or dialect of Kurdish that Nadia speaks, which is Kurmanji, and Arabic and English well, because so many Yazidis in the States had left before Arabic was required in schools. And so Nadia almost speaks this mixture sometimes of Arabic and Kurdish. And so it became really, really tricky. And it was obviously so important for me because her story is about telling her story. So I wanted to make sure to get her voice as accurate as possible into English and to share with the world, because, you know, the majority of her speeches, they're translating her live and in the moment, which is completely impressive that happens. But often she's speaking Arabic, which is not her first language, and they're translating in the moment where there can be, you know, a lot of mistakes sometimes. And so I wanted to put in a lot of work into her translations to really bring out the nuance. You know, a lot of the interviews, I show her stopping and changing her mind. And I mean, we spent hours and hours and hours over every word. So the only translator I could find was living in London, but he got a job at a refugee hotspot in Greece on this little island called Samos. And so I went and moved to Samos to work with him and loved it so much and was really just so productive there because it was, you know, on an island. No one could get a hold of me. So
yeah, it's not the worst place to move.
No, yeah. So it was great. So I extended my stay and ended up basically making the majority of this film on an island in Greece.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
You were asked in an interview last month what Nadia's motivation was for participating in this documentary. And you said it was to make people aware of the genocide against her people, the Yazidi people. And although the film does that, I would argue that the film is mostly about like how the Western media covers people like Nadia who are victims of war crimes, and sort of also about Nadia herself. How did you balance Nadia's personal goals as like a human rights figure with your own as a filmmaker?
Well, I think the things that Nadia is saying in a lot of her speeches, like, you know, one of the last lines, if she lists all these horrible things that have happened, like beheading of women and the raping of children will not move you. When will you move? And, you know, I don't think I was balancing these things as if they were two different things. Because I think what we're used to with these stories of activists, and especially women activists from the Middle East, is kind of a similar narrative of, you know, really simplifying this into look at this hero. But I think that's not really moving the needle and isn't the most responsible thing I could have done as a storyteller. The most responsible thing I think I could have done, which hopefully I did well in the film, is to really recognize not only Nadia, but ourselves in this issue. Because I think people go into this film thinking it's a film about Nadia, but realize it's a film, leave realizing it's a film about us and our responsibility and our role in this. You know, it's not just media. It's, you know, a lot of the film is showing her testimonies and meetings with different politicians and her interactions with the UN, and how there's, you know, a lot of people surrounding her with very good intentions, but how sometimes those good intentions can go astray. And, you know, pointing out the sensationalism of trauma and the gawking at trauma that happens within the news media, I think is important commentary about what the Yazidis are going through. Because, you know, there'll be headlines about ISIS rape victim wins Nobel Peace Prize, and we're all shocked by that. And, you know, but it's a sensationalism that doesn't doesn't help when, Nadia's being asked over and over and over again, how did they rape you? That re-traumatization of her is what I wanted to point out to people, and why, because something has to change, because it's not like Nadia went out and told her story and everything started to get better. A big part of this film is the recognition that even though she has to re-traumatize herself over and over and over again, so much is not being done. Very little has been done.
Mm.
And so it's not a balance between what Nadia wants and what I want. This was the reflection of what she's dealing with and going through, which is in a bigger way what the Yazidis are going through.
Yeah. Like, who are we serving with a story like that?
Yeah. A big part of this is I wanted for us to reflect as storytellers what our responsibilities are, especially when telling stories about trauma.
Yeah, I'm actually a journalist, and when I left your film, I felt like a little bit sick to my stomach and a little
Well, that's
yeah, no, it was very effective, and just felt very self-conscious about the way that the Western media and the liberal media, like, frankly, has covered people like Nadia. And it definitely changed the way that I think about myself as a storyteller. And I'm curious if it did the same for you when you were making it.
Oh, definitely. I think, it was a very confronting film to make on both sides. I had never witnessed the relationship between a journalist and a subject. And, we often get thrown in the same pile as documentary filmmakers and journalists, but I would never interview someone, 10 seconds after meeting them.
Mm-hmm.
That's just not the kind of films I make. And so it was very jarring for me to see the interviews that Nadia had to go through and the questions that they were asking. And it made me reflect on very deeply on what I was doing, why I was telling this story, what the point of it was. Was she, did I have access into her life because she thought the story that I would tell would change something? And, that is unpacking a lot of, survivor's guilt too, the reason that she's telling her story over and over and over again. And it was also very confronting because here you have this woman from very early in the morning to very late at night is constantly being asked, to give pieces of herself, whether it's her story or her testimony or, stand here and take a photo with me or give me a hug, make me feel better about this. You don't cry, that people would tell her not to cry. Just like stand up for her people and be strong. And it's like all these things. All these people were asking things of her all the time to, witnessing this and, also realizing that I too am asking things of her, put this mic on. Can I be in this space that's like one of your only private moments of the day? It really put a lot of responsibility on me to do right by her with this film, because I understood I was yet another person. And I thought, maybe if everyone sees all the things that we're asking of this very young woman after all that she's been through, then maybe we'll have more action and stop taking from her in this way that is inappropriate. If she's going to be doing this work, we need to respect it and move the needle for the Yazidis, like move things forward.
What do you think the line is as documentary filmmakers between taking someone's story, basically, and really like elevating someone's story in the way that you did with Nadia's?
I think it's been really interesting, and while touring with this film to different film festivals and screenings, because like you said, as a journalist, you walked away pretty sick to your stomach and confronted. I'm at these film festivals where I'm having conversations with many filmmakers, and they're reflecting on the films that they have at the festivals or past films that they've done. And we're having, thankfully, really great conversations about this kind of stuff. And I think the gut checks that I had was trying to dissect every question I was asking and every scene I was showing in the film to understand its purpose and why it was there. And also in reflection of, is this at least my truth? And I don't think there was any way that I could have tried to make people understand how Nadia feels. And I think that's often attempted with stories of trauma, and I don't think that that's appropriate. And it's done, not very tactfully in a lot of ways, where it's like sad music, sad story, kind of this trying to push an audience to feel a certain way. I think the responsibility that I had to try and do right by this story was to make sure it was the experience that I was having in the room, which was a lot to unpack, which goes back to, me wanting to edit it, because I just wanted you to feel like what it felt like to be in those places with her. And I didn't include any of her stories about her escape or her captivity. And those were some difficult conversations with even people who are on the team. But when I really thought about it, I didn't feel that was necessary information to know to care about the Yazidis or about Nadia.
Yeah.
Like, everyone knows what ISIS did. Like, and if you didn't know, within the first 3 minutes of the film, by saying that they captured women and used them as sex slaves. But to focus on the details of her captivity or her escape, I just really was questioning why we needed to know those things at all. Was it who she is as a person? Does it make you care more about the Yazidis? And like, all these answers were no, it doesn't matter.
Have you ever had to grapple with those kinds of decisions on another film, like where you had to take each scene and be like, what is this really adding to the film?
Definitely. I think every film I've made, I've had to really, really grapple with representation and the questions that I'm asking and what I'm showing the audience and what the bigger truth is. Because there's no objectivity, I don't think. It's not like I'm trying to be objective. I mean, this is definitely a story that I'm telling you. And so there's a lot of responsibility in that, whether it's about ranchers in Montana or Nadia Murad.
Is there anything else you learned from making On Her Shoulders that you know that you'll carry on into your next film?
Oh man, just a million things.
I'm sure. Such a broad question.
Yeah, I feel like every film I feel like a different human being after it's done, so and I think every film I'm making too, I'm asking these questions that I'm asking the audience to myself. What my perceptions are, what things do I need to unpack, like how I'm treating stories of trauma, all these things are conversations I want to bring into a space because I'm asking those questions of myself. So it is huge personal development that happens. So yeah, I feel like a completely different person than I was when they asked me to make the film in July of 2016. I don't even know who that person is.
What do you have coming up?
I hope I get to take like a 2-week break. But other than that, I'm starting a film in January about the Indigo Girls.
Why the Indigo Girls? So quite a departure. This is not what I was expecting you to say.
Yeah, no one else either. But I mean, I made 3 really heavy films in a row, and I just need to, like my stepdad says, sharpen the saw a bit and really do some healing. I mean, the edit of On Her Shoulders, I was watching some pretty sad things and horrific things, including, ISIS videos for 10 hours a day for a year. The edit was much harder it was more difficult than the shoot was, because I had to really unpack all of those emotions and really process what I had seen while I was with Nadia. And so it was really emotionally taxing. And it's actually the reason I'm building a editing residency and screenwriting residency in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The idea has been in my head for a while, but after making On Her Shoulders and talking to other filmmakers about the toll, and especially the mental and emotional toll that making these films can take on people, we're actually building a space in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where people can come for months at a time to just work on their edits or their screenwriting. Then the place will focus on health and mental health and there's wonderful conversations that are happening right now with in terms of the filmmaking industry, especially in doc world, about sustainability, financial sustainability. But I think we also need to be focusing and talking about mental health sustainability, because there's so many people that will make these really emotionally difficult films and they'll only make one.
When was I don't know if it was maybe a moment or you started feeling it over time, but when was like the moment that you decided that there was really a need for this kind of residency?
It's been a thing in the back of my head for a while, since after making Frame by Frame. And because so much of that edit, we had very little resources and it was extremely difficult. And I know I could have used something like this, but even more so with On Her Shoulders, because the team was even smaller and the story was much more difficult. And after, talking to people about my experience, it just, made me very determined to make this space happen, because I think it's something that's going to fill a niche that I think is very needed in this industry right now.
Thanks so much for listening. Rough Cut is hosted and produced by me, Jenny Butler. Our theme music is by Zach Wright. Our design is by Adam Glucksman. The podcast is co-produced by Sky Dillard Robbins, who's the founder and executive director of the Video Consortium. And all of our guests and the people who made this podcast happen are in the Video Consortium.
And for the filmmakers who are listening, we'd love for you to check us out and maybe join. So the Video Consortium is a creative community of the world's top nonfiction filmmakers and video journalists. We're all based throughout the world, but we have chapters in New York, LA, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Paris, and a bunch more coming soon. You can visit us at videoconsortium.com and find us on all of the social things. And if you're in one of our chapter cities and want to attend an upcoming monthly gathering, which are secret parties / screenings of sorts, just shoot us an email, info@videoconsortium.com.
And if you want to learn more about Rough Cut, you can visit roughcutpodcast.com and maybe shoot us a note.
Thanks so much for listening.
See you next time.